Good morning to everybody. In this class, let us see the definition of interpretation. The term interpretation of the statute means an understanding of the law. It is the process adapted by the courts to determine the meaning of legislature by way of legislative form. It is used to ascertain the actual connotations of the act or document along with the intention of the legislature. It tends to clarify the meaning of those terms and writings which are difficult to understand. Let us see its aims. It aims at finding out the intention of the author, that is, the court needs to identify what the author means by the words he or she has used in the context, in the text, preferably. That helps in getting what is written in the document. In short, interpretation object to ascertain the intention of the statute by the words used. If you take the further explanation of it, here the author means the parliament or legislature or the body who used to make the rules or enactments and regulations. And that is the author and whose intention is to be interpreted according to the text and according to the context. Now let's see the nature and scope. The necessity of interpretation would arise only where the language of the statutory provisions is ambiguous, not clear, or where two views are possible, or where the provisions gives a different meaning defeating the object of the statute. If the language is clear and unambiguous, no need of interpretation would arise. In this regard, a constitution bench of the 5 judges of the Supreme Court in R.S. Naik versus A.R. Antole has held, I quote, if the words of the statutes are clear and unambiguous, it is the plainest meaning, it is the plainest duty of the court to give effect to the natural meaning of the word used in the provision. The question of construction arises only in the event of an ambiguity or the plain meaning of the words used in the statute would be self-defeating. I unquote. Again, Supreme Court in Grasim Industries Limited versus Collector of Customs in Bombay, which is held, has followed the same principle and observed, I quote, where the words are clear and there is no obscurity or uncertainty or absurdity, and there is no ambiguity and the intention of the legislature is clearly conveyed, there is no scope for the court to take upon itself the task of amending or altering the statutory provisions. I unquote. Now see the object of interpretation of statutes. The object of interpretation of statutes is to determine the intention of the legislature conveyed expressly or impliedly in the language used. As stated by the Salmon, by interpretation or construction is meant the process by which the court seeks to ascertain the meaning of the legislature through the medium of authoritative forms in which it is expressed. And here, both the words interpretation and construction, and let us see the construction's later part, what it says. By the time being now, we will see the purpose of interpretation of statutes. What is the purpose? The purpose is to help the judges to ascertain the intention of the legislature, not to control that intention or to confine it with the limits which the judge may deem reasonable or expedient. And the correction is one that best harmonizes the words with the object of the statutes. Here in this part, we will also study the harmonizing certain statutes, like in the taxation or in the constitution or in any other aspect is concerned. But timing here, as we stated, as stated by the IRJ, to be literal, rather we can use the word to be literal in meaning to is to see the skin and miss the sound. But the judicial key of the construction is the composite perception of the deha and dehi of the provisions. That means both the skin and we should not miss the skin and we should not miss the soul also. And that is the harmonizing, and we will study it later part in the later classes. But come to the point now is, according to the Blackstone, the fairest and the rational method of interpreting the statute is by exploring the intention of the legislature through the most natural and probable signs, which are either the words, the context, the subject matter, the effects and the consequences, or the spirit and the reason of the law. And that's the interpretation which says about it. Now we'll see, as we said in the earlier, we will see the definition of the, or we'll see about the construction. And here what we'll see, the definition of the construction. Yes, in law, the construction means the process of legal exposition which determines the sense and explanation of the abstruse terms, writing, etc. in the statutes and draws a conclusion on the basis of logical reasoning with respect to the subject that lies above the direct expression of the legal context or legal text. Next, the basic principle of the construction of the statute is to read it in a literal manner, meaning that by elucidating the words used in the statute, ordinarily and grammatically, if it results in ambiguity and is likely to convey another meaning, then the court can opt for its literal meaning. However, if no such absurdity is possible, the fundamental rules of interpretation can be adapted. Here, if I want to quote an example, and the law says, for instance, in the company law, later we will make it out, and meeting called for the at least twice in a year, that is a general body meeting, and if the meeting is not called twice in a year, then the punishment would be there, its regard. Suppose if it is written that the meeting is called twice in a year, if not, there shall be a punishment for that one. Or we will use here, there will be a punishment. There must be a punishment. Better, that is the word. There must be a punishment. But here must means either it may, or we can say not must. There may be a punishment. But if the maybe what used over here is maybe or may not be. But in the context, it is clearly says that if the meeting is not conducted over there, and there shall be a punishment, that should be read. But here, may be punished is reading here as shall be punished. That means we are not discovering what is there, but we are a bit altering, constructing with using the may as a shall. And that's why it is also says construction of the word rather than the interpretation of the word. That is an example which is cited over from the company law. And let us see some important points to be taken care in the context of interpreting the statutes. Here, number one, intention of the legislature. And statute must be read as a whole in the context. And the third, statute should be construed as to make it effective and workable. If statutory provision is ambiguous and capable of various circumstructions, then the construction must be adapted which will give the meaning and effect to the other provisions of the enactment rather than that which will give none. And the last one is, if the meaning is plain, effect must be given in the irrespective of consequences. Now let us see the difference between the interpretation and construction. But now sometimes we will use the interpretation and construction in synonyms as synonyms, but there is a distinction between them. And here we will see the distinction. The statute is defined as the will or the order of legislature. That is the statute we already discussed in earlier classes, which is expressed in the form of text. The traditional way to interpret or construe a statute is to understand the intention of the legislature. The intention of the legislature could be incorporated the actual meaning of the object. The process of interpretation and construction assists the judiciary body in determining the meaning and purpose of the legislature. Interpreting helps in determining the real meaning and intention of the legislature. On the other hand, construction is used to ascertain the legal effect of the legal text. The two terms are used interchangeably, but there exists a fine line of difference between the interpretation and construction in their connotation. So, to check out this article in which we are simplified it for you in the tabular form, that is interpretation construction. But earlier I already discussed it in the company law. The general body meeting should be at least to be 2 years. If it is not so, there instead of may be punished, we should say that you shall be punished. And here may be punished, if it is written over there, will be construed as they shall be punished. That example we already said, we made in the company law in the earlier discussion. And now we'll see the basis of comparison and interpretation and construction. Here, basis of comparison, we will take the point meaning. First, we will concentrate on the meaning. If the meaning is interpretation implies the identification of true sense of the statute. What is the true sense of the author? The statute says that it will be the interpretation. But when you say the construction, construction means drawing inference about the subject that are above the direct expression of text. What is exactly the expression of text is there? As we stated here, may be read as a shall, and that's why the punishment should be there. So that is the construction. When the basis of the determination determines its concern, linguistic meaning should be taken in interpretation. But in the legal construction, in construction, legal effect should be taken. What is the outcome of it? What is the effect of it? If the interpretation does not give a proper meaning, then we should have to construe it, and a different context should be taken into consideration. And used when court complies with the simple meaning of the legal text. But here in the construction, legal text exhibits ambiguous meaning, and the court has to decide whether the words used in the legal text covers the case or not. And when you see the further difference of the interpretation and construction can be drawn clearly on the following grounds. In law, interpretation refers to understanding the words and true sense in the provision of the statute. On the other hand, construction is described as a drawing conclusions in relation to the case that lie beyond the outright expression of the legal text. While interpreting is all about the linguistic meaning of the legal text, when the construction determines the legal effect of the words and writing of the statute. When the simple meaning of the legal text is to be drawn, then it will be called an interpretation. Conversely, when the literal meaning of the word used in the legal result in ambiguity, then construction is opted so as to decide whether the case is covered by it or not. At last, in the conclusion, when it comes to the legal exposition of the statute or act or any agreement or interpretation precedes construction, while the interpretation of the statute is all about exploring the written text, whereas the construction is used in the broader sense, that is, not only helps to determine the sense and explanations of the provisions of the act, but also illustrate the legal effect. That means, in this context, we already discussed the meaning of the interpretation and the purpose and the basis and the construction, the definition, and when it will be construed and how it can be construed, and it is a comparison between the construction and the interpretation, and later on we have discussed also the conclusion with regarding both the distinction of the interpretation and construction is there. Then in construction we will use the different terminology, but in the interpretation we use the literal meaning of it, and there is no change of the words. And it is the end of this today's this topic regarding the interpretation and construction is concerned.